I never thought a February ice storm in Columbus, Ohio would turn me into a neighborhood legend. But here I am, watching Karen Whitmore from the HOA slip across her driveway for the third time this morning while sipping my coffee. My name is Zachary Young, and I have lived in Willow Creek Estates for exactly 4 years, 3 months, and 12 days. I know the precise timeline because that is how long I have been dealing with Karen and her endless HOA complaints. She lives 3 houses down from me in a sprawling colonial that probably cost twice what mine did. And she has been the president of our homeowners association for the past 7 years. Most of that time, she has made it her personal mission to ensure every blade of grass, every mailbox, and every decorative element in our neighborhood meets her exacting standards. The ice storm hit Columbus hard last night. We got about half an inch of freezing rain followed by 3 inches of snow, and the temperature dropped to 15 degrees. My driveway looked like a skating rink when I woke up at 6 in the morning, so I grabbed my supply of rock salt from the garage and spent 45 minutes making sure I could actually get my truck out without ending up in the emergency room. I used about 3 bags of the stuff, but I still had another 15 bags stacked neatly in my garage. I always buy in bulk at the hardware store because winter in Ohio is no joke, and I learned my lesson 2 years ago when I ran out during a blizzard and had to chip ice for 3 hours straight. I had just finished salting my walkway when I heard the aggressive clicking of heels on pavement. Karen appeared at the end of my driveway wearing a puffy white coat that made her look like a marshmallow with legs, and her highlighted blonde hair was pulled back so tight I wondered if it gave her headaches. Her face already had that pinched expression she always wore when she was about to complain about something. "Zachary," she said, not even bothering with a good morning, "I need your rock salt." I stood there holding my empty bag, staring at her. "Good morning to you too, Karen." She waved her hand dismissively. Yes, good morning. I need rock salt. My driveway is completely iced over and I have an important HOA board meeting at my house this afternoon. I went to 3 stores this morning and they are all sold out. I know you always buy too much of everything, so I am sure you have extra. The way she said too much made it sound like I was hoarding supplies for the apocalypse. I have some left, yeah. I always keep extra for emergencies. Perfect. I will need at least 10 bags. Bring them to my house within the hour. She started to turn away like the conversation was over. Hold on, I said, my irritation rising. I am not just giving you 10 bags of rock salt. Do you know how much that costs? Plus, I might need it if we get more ice this week. Karen turned back, her eyes narrowing. Zachary, as HOA president, I am invoking community emergency protocol. During weather emergencies, residents are expected to share resources for the common good. Besides, I noticed your mailbox is still that awful shade of blue. According to HOA Guidelines Section 12, Subsection 4, all mailboxes must be either black or bronze. I have been very patient about giving you time to fix this violation. There it was, the veiled threat. Karen loved to hold HOA violations over people's heads like a sword. My mailbox was actually navy blue, which I thought was close enough to black, but apparently Karen's vision was sharp enough to detect the difference. The mailbox thing again. Karen, I have been meaning to repaint it, but I have been busy with work. Well, perhaps if you helped me with the rock salt situation, I could extend your deadline for the mailbox violation. Otherwise, I will have to issue a formal fine, $50 per day until it is corrected. She smiled sweetly, but there was nothing sweet about it. I felt my jaw clench. This was classic Karen. She had pulled similar stunts with other neighbors. Last summer, She threatened Bob Martinez with a fine for his lawn being a quarter-inch too long, while simultaneously demanding he let her use his riding mower because hers was broken. The woman had no shame. "Fine," I said, but my mind was already working. "I will bring some bags over in a bit." "Excellent. I knew you would see reason. Make sure it is within the hour, Zachary. I have a lot to do today." She walked away, her heels clicking on the icy pavement, somehow managing not to slip despite wearing the most impractical footwear imaginable. I stood there for a moment, fuming. Then I walked back into my garage and looked at my supplies. 15 bags of rock salt sat stacked against the wall. Next to them were 12 bags of playground sand I had bought last summer when I was planning to build a sandbox for my nephew before he moved to Michigan with his parents. The bags looked almost identical, both brown paper with minimal labeling. An idea formed in my mind. A petty, beautiful, absolutely perfect idea. I loaded 10 bags of the playground sand into my truck bed and drove them down to Karen's house. Her driveway was indeed a sheet of ice, and I could see where she had tried to walk across it. There were scuff marks and what looked like a spot where she had fallen, based on the impact pattern in the frost. Karen came out before I even finished unloading the first bag. "Finally, just stack them by the garage door. I will have my husband spread them when he gets home from work." "Actually, you should probably do it soon," I said, keeping my voice helpful. "The temperature is supposed to drop even more this afternoon. The sooner you get this stuff down, the better it will work." She looked annoyed. "I suppose you are right. Fine, I will do it myself." Gregory is useless with this kind of thing anyway. I helped her unload all 10 bags, stacking them neatly by her garage. She did not say thank you, just inspected the bags like I might have shorted her on weight or something. "This better work, Zachary. I am expecting 12 people this afternoon, and I cannot have board members slipping on my driveway. It would be mortifying." "Oh, it will definitely be memorable," I said, which was absolutely true. "Just spread it evenly across the ice and make sure to really cover the bad spots." I drove back home, parked my truck, and settled in to watch the show. My living room window has a perfect view down the street, and I could see Karen's house clearly. I made myself another cup of coffee and grabbed some leftover pizza from last night. About 20 minutes later, Karen emerged with the first bag of sand. She had changed into more practical clothes, snow pants, boots, and a thick jacket. She ripped open the bag and started spreading the contents across her driveway with a shovel. From my distance, the sand looked just like rock salt, the same grayish-tan color scattered across the white ice. She worked quickly. I had to give her that. Within 45 minutes, she had emptied all 10 bags across her driveway and walkway. She stood back, admiring her work, then carefully walked across the treated surface. Even from my house, I could see her slip slightly, catch herself, and look confused. She tried another few steps, moving more carefully. Her driveway was still just as icy as before, now just with a layer of sand on top that provided exactly 0 traction improvement, and no melting whatsoever. I watched her pull out her phone, probably checking the weather or looking up why rock salt was not working. She bent down and picked up a handful of the sand, examining it. Even from here, I could see the moment of realization dawn on her face. My phone rang 5 minutes later. Karen's name flashed on the screen. "Hello," I answered, trying to sound innocent. "What did you give me?" Her voice was shaking with rage. "Rock salt, just like you asked for." "This is not rock salt, this is sand. Regular playground sand. My driveway is still completely iced over and now I have sand everywhere. Really? That is weird. Maybe you got a defective batch." You know how quality control can be sometimes. "Zachary Young, You did this on purpose. You gave me Sandbox sand instead of rock salt. I have a board meeting in less than 2 hours and my driveway is a death trap. Karen, I am not sure what you are talking about. I gave you what you asked for. If you are having problems, maybe you did not spread it correctly. She made a sound like a tea kettle about to explode. I am reporting this to the HOA board. This is sabotage. This is destruction of property. This is petty, like threatening me with daily fines over a mailbox color. I kept my voice calm, which I knew would infuriate her more. You will regret this, Zachary, I promise you that. She hung up. I sat back, feeling more satisfied than I probably should have. Was it petty? Absolutely. Was it justified? In my opinion, yes. Karen had been terrorizing this neighborhood for years with her power trips and threats. Someone needed to remind her that she could not just bully people into giving her whatever she wanted. The board meeting time arrived, and I watched from my window as cars started pulling up to Karen's house. The first board member, a woman named Patricia whom I recognized from neighborhood events, got out of her car and immediately slipped on Karen's driveway. She caught herself on the car door, but I could see her yelling something. The second board member, an older gentleman named Harold, inched his way up the driveway like he was crossing a minefield. By the time all 12 board members had arrived, there had been multiple slips, at least one complete fall that I witnessed, and a lot of angry gestures toward the driveway. I could not hear what they were saying, but body language told me plenty. Karen stood at her front door, her arms crossed, her face red even from this distance. The meeting lasted about an hour. When people started leaving, they were even more careful than when they arrived. Patricia actually gave up on walking and slid down the driveway on her feet like she was skiing. Another woman took off her shoes and walked in her socks, which seemed like a terrible idea, but apparently felt safer to her. My phone rang again that evening. This time it was not Karen but Bob Martinez, my neighbor who had dealt with his own Karen situation last summer. "Dude, please tell me the sand story is true," he said without preamble. "What sand story?" I played dumb. "Karen is telling everyone you sabotaged her by giving her playground sand instead of rock salt. Patricia called me because she wants to know if there is grounds to fine you. I told her I had no idea what she was talking about, but privately, I think you are a hero." I laughed. "I gave her exactly what she deserved, Bob. She threatened me with daily fines if I did not hand over my rock salt supply. She has been holding that stupid mailbox violation over my head for months. Oh man, I love it. Half the board is furious at her right now because 3 people almost got seriously hurt on her driveway. Harold is talking about calling a special meeting to discuss whether she is fit to be president if she cannot even maintain safe conditions for official HOA business. This was better than I expected. Really, really. Look, I am not saying what you did was mature or responsible, but Karen has had this coming for a long time. She tried to fine me $300 last year because my grass was too long. Meanwhile, her own backyard looks like a jungle. She is a hypocrite who loves power but hates responsibility. We talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. I felt vindicated but also slightly nervous. Karen was not the type to let something like this go. She would retaliate, I was sure of it. The next morning, I found a formal letter from the HOA in my mailbox. It was a violation notice for my mailbox color, just as threatened, with daily fines of $50 starting immediately. There was also a second notice for creating hazardous conditions for HOA board members through willful deception and sabotage. That one demanded I pay for professional ice removal services for Karen's driveway, plus reimbursement for the damaged sand-covered surface. Total demanded payment, $850. I took photos of both letters and called my lawyer friend, Marcus Chen, who lived over in the German Village neighborhood. Marcus had helped me review the HOA documents when I first bought my house, and he had warned me then that the rules were unusually strict and vaguely worded, which gave the board a lot of power. "They cannot fine you for giving her sand," Marcus said after I explained the situation. "First, you are not under any legal obligation to give her anything. Second, she accepted the bags without verifying what they were. Third, and most importantly, there is no HOA rule that says you must provide accurate winter weather supplies to other residents during emergencies. That is not even a real thing. What about the mailbox fine? That one is trickier. If the HOA guidelines specifically state mailboxes must be black or bronze, and yours is clearly blue, then technically they can fine you. However, $50 per day is excessive and probably not enforceable. Most HOA fines cap out at $25 per day for minor violations, and mailbox color definitely counts as minor. I would send them a formal response refusing to pay both fines and offering to repaint your mailbox within 30 days as a good faith gesture. I drafted the response letter that afternoon, keeping it professional but firm. I stated that I would repaint my mailbox by mid-March, weather permitting, but I would not be paying any fines for either violation. I dropped it off at Karen's house since she was the HOA president, and all correspondence went through her. She answered the door with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Zachary, how nice of you to deliver this in person. Just want to make sure there is no confusion about my position," I said. "Oh, there is no confusion. You are refusing to follow HOA rules and you deliberately sabotaged a board meeting. The consequences will be severe." She took the envelope from my hand. "You should also know that I have called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow night to discuss your membership in this community. Residents who actively work against the HOA's interests can be subject to additional penalties, including potential legal action to force the sale of their property." My stomach dropped. "You cannot force me to sell my house. Read your HOA agreement, Section 27. In extreme cases of repeated violations and hostile action toward the board, we absolutely can pursue legal remedies that include forced sale. I have already spoken to our HOA attorney, and he agrees this situation qualifies." She started to close the door. "Have a good evening, Zachary." I walked back to my house feeling significantly less victorious than I had that morning. Could they really force me to sell? I called Marcus immediately. "Let me look at your HOA documents again," he said. I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Okay, Section 27 does mention forced sale, but the requirements are very specific. You would need to have at least 5 separate violations within a 12-month period, all properly documented and appealed through the official process. Plus, the violation would need to represent a significant threat to property values or community safety. A blue mailbox and some Sandbox sand do not meet that threshold. Karen seems to think otherwise. Karen can think whatever she wants. The reality is that forcing a homeowner to sell is incredibly difficult and expensive for an HOA. They would need to file a lawsuit, prove their case in court, and even then, a judge would probably just order you to pay fines or correct violations, not sell your house. She is trying to scare you. It is working, I admitted. Do not let it. Go to the emergency board meeting tomorrow and defend yourself calmly and rationally. Explain that you were not required to provide supplies, that Karen coerced you with threats of fines, and that you have already agreed to fix the mailbox issue. If they vote to pursue legal action, we will deal with it, but I seriously doubt it will get that far." The emergency board meeting was held at the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that hosted HOA functions and occasional resident parties. I arrived at 7 in the evening to find about 30 people already there, far more than usually attended board meetings. Apparently, word had spread about the situation, and people wanted to see the drama unfold. Karen sat at the front table with the other 4 board members: Patricia, Harold, a younger woman named Jennifer, and a middle-aged man named Thomas. Karen called the meeting to order and immediately launched into a description of my crimes. Zachary Young deliberately deceived me by providing playground sand when I specifically requested rock salt during a weather emergency. This resulted in hazardous conditions that endangered 12 board members, one of whom sustained minor injuries from a fall. Additionally, Mr. Young has been in violation of mailbox color requirements for over 4 months, despite multiple warnings. His pattern of disregard for community standards and active sabotage of HOA operations demonstrates that he is not fit to be a member of this community. She made it sound so official and damning. Several residents were nodding along, looking at me with disapproval. "Mr. Young, would you like to respond?" Harold asked. He sounded more reasonable than Karen, which gave me hope. I stood up, my heart pounding. "Yes, thank you. First, I want to clarify what actually happened. Karen came to my house and demanded 10 bags of rock salt, threatening me with daily fines if I did not comply. I was under no obligation to give her anything. Rock salt was sold out everywhere because of the storm, meaning I could not replace what I gave away. When someone demands your property under threat of fines, that is coercion." "That is absurd," Karen interrupted. "I was invoking emergency protocols." "What emergency protocols?" I asked. "Can you show me in the HOA documents where it says residents must provide supplies to board members on demand?" Karen's face reddened. "It is common sense. Community cooperation during emergencies. Cooperation is voluntary. Coercion is not." When I realized I could not spare my actual rock salt supply, I provided what I could. If Karen had checked what she was receiving instead of just demanding I deliver it immediately, she would have noticed it was not rock salt. "You deliberately deceived me," Karen shouted, standing up. "I gave you sand for your icy driveway. Sand can provide traction on ice. It is not my fault you expected it to melt the ice. Maybe you should have gone to a store yourself instead of bullying a neighbor into giving you his supplies." Several residents laughed at that. I could see Bob Martinez in the back row, grinning widely. Patricia spoke up. "Karen, did you actually threaten him with fines if he did not give you the salt?" I reminded him of an existing violation and suggested that cooperative behavior might be viewed favorably, Karen said stiffly. "That is called a quid pro quo threat," Thomas said, frowning. "We discussed this last year, Karen. You cannot use violations as leverage to get what you want from residents. That is an abuse of your position." "I was trying to ensure safe conditions for a board meeting," Karen insisted. "At your house," Jennifer added. "A board meeting you scheduled at your house. Why did we not meet here at the clubhouse like usual?" Karen faltered. "I thought it would be more convenient." "More convenient for you, maybe," Harold said. "Karen, I think we need to seriously discuss whether this incident represents an abuse of authority. Threatening residents with fines to extract property or services from them is exactly the kind of behavior we have warned you about." The meeting devolved into arguments between board members. About half the residents seemed to support me, while others thought I should have just given Karen real rock salt and avoided the whole mess. After an hour of debate, the board voted on whether to pursue legal action against me for forced sale. The vote was 4-1 against, with only Karen voting yes. "However," Harold said, looking at me seriously, You do need to fix the mailbox within 30 days or we will be forced to fine you. And Zachary, in the future, if you have a problem with how Karen or any board member is treating you, please bring it to the full board's attention immediately. We cannot fix problems we do not know about. I agreed, feeling relieved. Karen looked furious, her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. After the meeting ended, several neighbors came up to thank me privately. Bob clapped me on the shoulder. That was amazing. I have wanted to stand up to her for years. Why did you not? I asked. He shrugged. Easier to just go along, I guess. Keep my head down. But you are right, she has been abusing her power. Maybe this will make her think twice. I wanted to believe that, but I knew Karen better than that by now. Over the next week, things seemed to calm down. I bought paint for my mailbox and planned to tackle the job as soon as temperatures rose above freezing consistently. Karen had not contacted me directly, which I took as a good sign. Then the violations started multiplying. First, I got a notice that my trash cans were visible from the street, violating Section 8, subsection 12 of the HOA guidelines. I had been putting my trash cans in the same spot every week for 4 years without issue, but suddenly it was a problem. Fine, $50 if not corrected within 48 hours. 2 days later, another notice. My garden hose was visible in my front yard, violation of Section 15, subsection 3. Fine, $50. 3 days after that, my front porch light was too bright and creating light pollution. Section 19, subsection 7. Fine, $50. Every single violation came with Karen's signature and a 48-hour correction window. She was trying to bury me in fines for things that had never been problems before. I documented everything and sent copies to Marcus. This is harassment, he said immediately. She is selectively enforcing rules against you that she ignores for everyone else. Do you have any photos of other houses in the neighborhood? I did better than that. I spent an entire Saturday driving through Willow Creek Estates with my camera, documenting every single violation I could find. Trash cans visible from the street, 14 houses including Karen's. Garden hoses in front yards, 8 houses including Patricia's. Bright porch lights, at least 20 houses. I compiled everything into a detailed report and sent it to the entire HOA board with the subject line, Selective Enforcement and Harassment. In the email, I laid out every violation Karen had cited against me, along with photographic evidence of identical violations at other properties, including Karen's own house. Thomas responded first. This is very concerning. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. Patricia responded next. I had no idea my hose was a violation. Karen never mentioned it to me. Harold called an emergency board meeting, this time without Karen's input. I attended along with about 15 other residents who had received similar harassment violations over the past few months. It turned out Karen had been targeting multiple people she perceived as enemies or threats to her authority. The board meeting lasted 3 hours. Karen tried to defend herself, claiming she was just enforcing rules that had always existed. But when confronted with evidence that she ignored the same violations at her own property and at the properties of her friends, she had no good answer. Finally, Harold moved for a vote of no confidence in Karen's presidency. I have been on this board for 9 years, and I have never seen such blatant abuse of power. Karen, you have used your position to bully and harass residents, selectively enforce rules based on personal vendettas, and create a hostile environment in this community. I move that we remove you as president effective immediately. Jennifer seconded the motion. The vote was 4-0 in favor, with Karen abstaining because the vote was about her. Karen stood up, her face pale. "You cannot do this. I have been president for 7 years. I have improved property values. I have maintained standards." "You have terrorized people," Thomas said quietly. "That is not leadership, Karen. That is tyranny." She grabbed her coat and purse and stormed out of the clubhouse. I heard her car peel out of the parking lot, tires squealing. The board appointed Harold as interim president and voted to rescind all fines issued in the past 6 months, pending individual review to determine which were legitimate and which were harassment-based. They also voted to establish new oversight procedures to prevent any single board member from having too much unilateral power. I walked out of that meeting feeling lighter than I had in months. Bob caught up with me in the parking lot. "We should have done this years ago," he said. "She made everyone miserable, but we all just accepted it because fighting back seemed too hard." "Sometimes you have to stand up to bullies," I said, "even when it is petty and ridiculous and over something as stupid as rock salt." Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood atmosphere improved dramatically. Harold proved to be a fair and reasonable president who actually listened to residents instead of dictating to them. The board implemented a new appeal process for violations and established clear timelines for corrections before fines could be issued. Karen kept her head down for a while, but eventually, the ice storm had one more consequence to deliver. I was grabbing my mail one afternoon in early March when I saw a police car parked outside Karen's house. 2 officers were talking to Gregory, Karen's husband, who looked upset. I tried not to stare, but it was impossible not to notice when one of the officers went inside the house and emerged 20 minutes later with Karen in handcuffs. The neighborhood gossip mill went into overdrive. Bob texted me within an hour. "Did you see Karen get arrested? What did she do?" I had no idea, but I found out the next day when the story hit the local news. Karen had been embezzling money from the HOA funds. She had been HOA president for 7 years, during which time she had total control over the community's financial accounts. An audit triggered by her removal from the presidency revealed that she had been siphoning money for years, disguising the theft as legitimate expenses for neighborhood maintenance and improvements. The total amount stolen was over $47,000. The news report showed Karen's booking photo and detailed some of the fake expenses she had created. She had billed the HOA for landscaping services that never happened, repairs to the clubhouse that were never done, and legal consultations with attorneys who did not exist. She had been funneling the money into a private account and using it to fund her lifestyle, expensive clothes, luxury vacations, and home renovations. Gregory claimed he had no knowledge of the theft, and investigators seemed to believe him. Karen was charged with embezzlement, fraud, and theft, all felonies that carried significant prison time. The HOA held another emergency meeting to discuss the situation. A lawyer explained that we could potentially recover some of the stolen money through insurance and through seizure of Karen's assets if she was convicted. In the meantime, every homeowner would need to pay a special assessment to cover the shortfall in the HOA budget. My share was $312, which stung but felt worth it to be rid of Karen's reign of terror. The legal process moved slowly. Karen pleaded not guilty initially, claiming the money had been used for legitimate HOA purposes and that the auditors had made mistakes. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, forged invoices, fake vendor contracts, all of it pointed to deliberate, systematic theft over multiple years. In July, 6 months after the initial arrest, Karen changed her plea to guilty as part of a deal with prosecutors. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. Gregory filed for divorce within a week of her sentencing. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal. I repainted my mailbox a nice bronze color and actually started attending HOA meetings regularly, figuring that community involvement was the best way to prevent another Karen situation. Harold remained president and did an excellent job balancing rules enforcement with reasonable flexibility. On a cold morning in December, almost a year after the ice storm that started everything, I was salting my driveway when Bob walked over with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing me one. "Thanks." I took a sip, appreciating the warmth. "Did you hear Karen's house finally sold?" "Yeah, I saw the sign come down. Gregory apparently took a huge loss just to get rid of it and move on. Cannot blame him." We stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the snow fall. "You know what the funny thing is?" Bob said eventually. "If she had just asked nicely for the rock salt, you probably would have given it to her." "Probably," I admitted. "I am not a monster, but she could not help herself. She had to make it a power play, had to threaten and coerce instead of just being a decent neighbor. And that led to her losing everything. Presidency, freedom, marriage, house. All because she could not stop being a bully." "The sand was just the catalyst," I said. "She did this to herself over years of stealing and abusing power. I just finally gave her the pushback she needed." "Still, it is a hell of a story. Karen demanded your rock salt supply, so you gave her Sandbox sand and watched her driveway stay icy, and somehow that led to her going to prison for embezzlement." Bob laughed. "You should write this down somewhere. No one would believe it otherwise." "Maybe I will," I said, smiling. The snow continued to fall, covering the street in fresh white. My driveway was perfectly salted and safe. Down the street, the empty house that used to be Karen's sat dark and vacant, a monument to what happens when people abuse the small amount of power they are given. I finished my coffee, thanked Bob, and went back inside to warm up. The ice storm and everything that followed felt like a distant memory now, but the lesson stuck with me. Stand up to bullies, even when it seems petty. Document everything, and never underestimate the consequences of giving someone exactly what they deserve. My phone buzzed with a text from the current HOA group chat. Harold had sent a weather alert about another potential ice storm coming in tonight, along with a reminder to salt driveways and check on elderly neighbors who might need help. The tone was helpful and community-minded, nothing like the dictatorial messages Karen used to send. Several neighbors responded with thanks and offers to help each other out. Patricia said she had extra salt if anyone needed it, no strings attached. Thomas offered to snowblow anyone's driveway who could not manage it themselves. This was what a homeowners association was supposed to be. Neighbors helping neighbors, not a dictatorship run by someone on a power trip. I checked my garage to make sure I still had plenty of rock salt, the real stuff this time. My 15 bags from last year were mostly gone, but I had restocked in November, learning from experience. I also still had most of that playground sand, sitting in the corner collecting dust. Looking at those sand bags made me think about that moment when Karen called me, rage in her voice, demanding to know what I had given her. I had felt guilty for about 2 seconds before remembering how she had threatened me, coerced me, and tried to force me to give up my supplies so she could have a nice driveway for a meeting she chose to host at her house. The guilt disappeared fast. I grabbed my snow shovel and rock salt and went back outside to prepare for the coming storm. A few neighbors were doing the same, and we waved to each other, called out friendly greetings, offered to help if needed. This was the neighborhood I had wanted to live in when I bought my house 4 years ago. It took a bag of Sandbox sand, an ice storm, and a year of legal drama to get here. But it was worth it. That night, the ice storm hit as predicted. I woke up to the familiar sound of sleet pelting my windows and the creak of tree branches weighted down with ice. My driveway had a solid coating of freezing rain, but I was prepared. I spent an hour salting and shoveling, making sure everything was safe and accessible. As I worked, I noticed several neighbors doing the same. Bob was tackling his driveway. Patricia was helping the elderly couple next door to her. Thomas was out with his snowblower, clearing not just his driveway but also the sidewalk in front of 4 houses. This was the difference. This was what changed when you removed someone who viewed community leadership as an opportunity for personal power, and replaced them with people who actually cared about their neighbors. I thought about Karen, sitting in prison somewhere, probably still convinced she had done nothing wrong. Some people never learn. They cannot see past their own needs and desires to understand how their actions affect others. She had been given authority and used it as a weapon. When someone finally pushed back, her entire house of cards collapsed. The lesson was not really about rock salt or Sandbox sand. It was about standing up for yourself when someone tries to abuse their power over you. It was about documentation and evidence. It was about community, and what happens when one person decides their personal fiefdom matters more than the collective good. I finished my driveway and moved on to my walkway, making sure every inch was properly treated. My mailbox, now a regulation bronze color, stood at the end of my driveway like a symbol of compliance. But it was compliance on my terms, done in my time frame, not because Karen threatened and coerced me. The sun started to rise, turning the ice-covered world into something beautiful. Tree branches sparkled like crystal. The street looked like a river of diamonds. It was dangerous and treacherous, but also stunning in its own way. Bob walked over again, this time without coffee since it was barely 6 in the morning. "Another ice storm, another day of rock salt," he said. "At least this year we do not have to worry about anyone demanding our supplies." "Thank goodness for small mercies," I agreed. "Hey, I meant to ask you, whatever happened to all that Sandbox sand you had? Did you ever use it?" I grinned. "Still sitting in my garage." "I keep meaning to get rid of it, but part of me wants to keep it as a souvenir. A reminder of the day I gave Karen exactly what she deserved." Bob laughed so hard he nearly slipped on a patch of ice. "That is perfect. You should frame a bag of it and hang it on your wall." "That might be taking it too far. Maybe, or maybe it is exactly the right amount of petty." He steadied himself and looked around at the neighborhood, at all our neighbors working together to deal with the storm. "You know what? I am glad you did it." Someone needed to stand up to her, and it ended up revealing all the illegal stuff she was doing. If you had just given her the rock salt and kept quiet about the threats, she might have kept stealing for years. He had a point. My petty act of revenge had set off a chain of events that ultimately exposed serious criminal behavior. Karen's reaction to the Sandbox sand had been so extreme that it drew attention to her patterns of bullying and abuse, which led to her removal as president, which triggered the audit that revealed the embezzlement. One bag of Sandbox sand had toppled a corrupt presidency. "I am just glad it is over," I said honestly. "I bought this house because I wanted a nice, quiet place to live. The last thing I expected was to end up in a war with the HOA president that ended with her going to prison." "Life is weird like that sometimes," Bob agreed. "The smallest things can have the biggest consequences." We talked for a few more minutes before returning to our respective properties. I finished salting everything that needed it, then went inside to shower and warm up. The ice storm continued through the morning, but by afternoon, The sun came out and started the slow process of melting everything away. I sat in my living room with a book and a cup of hot chocolate, occasionally glancing out the window at the winter scene. The spot where I used to watch Karen's house was now just an empty lot waiting for new owners. The for sale sign had come down, but no moving trucks had arrived yet. Eventually, some new family would move in, probably with no idea about the drama that had unfolded here. They would inherit a much better neighborhood than the one I moved into 4 years ago. They would have Harold as their HOA president, fair and reasonable and actually concerned with community welfare. They would have neighbors who helped each other instead of neighbors who lived in fear of violations and fines, all because someone finally said no to a bully. My phone rang, and I saw it was Marcus Chen, my lawyer friend who had helped me through the whole ordeal. "Hey, Zachary. Just wanted to check in and see how things are going with the new HOA board." "Really well, actually. Harold is doing a great job. No more harassment violations, no more threats. It is like living in a completely different neighborhood." "That is excellent. And I thought you would want to know, Karen's restitution payments have started coming through. Your HOA should see about 60% of the stolen money returned over the next few years. The rest is gone, probably spent, but 60% is better than nothing." "That is good news. It will help with the budget shortfall." "Also, I heard through the legal grapevine that she is not adjusting well to prison. Apparently, she keeps trying to organize the other inmates and tell them what to do. It is not going over well." I could not help but laugh at that image. Karen in prison, still trying to be in charge, still trying to control everyone around her. Some people never learned. "I almost feel bad for her," I said, though I did not really mean it. "Do not waste your sympathy." She stole nearly $50,000 from her neighbors and spent years making people miserable because she enjoyed having power over them. She earned every consequence coming her way. We chatted for a few more minutes before hanging up. I returned to my book, but my mind kept wandering back to that day last February when Karen appeared at my driveway demanding rock salt. In that moment, I had made a split-second decision to give her sand instead, a petty act of revenge that seemed harmless and satisfying. I could not have known it would expose years of criminal activity. I could not have predicted the domino effect that would follow. All I knew was that I was tired of being threatened and bullied, and I wanted to push back in some small way. The fact that it led to justice being served was almost accidental. Almost. The truth was, Karen had built her house of cards on a foundation of fear and intimidation. She kept people compliant through threats and selective enforcement. As long as everyone stayed scared and quiet, she could continue stealing and abusing her power indefinitely. But the moment someone pushed back, the moment someone said no and refused to be bullied, the whole structure became unstable. Other people found the courage to speak up. Patterns of abuse became visible. The investigation began. The Sandbox sand was not the cause of Karen's downfall. It was the catalyst that gave people permission to fight back. Evening came, and the temperature dropped again, refreezing anything that had melted during the afternoon sunshine. I went out one more time to check my driveway and add a bit more salt to problem areas. The neighborhood was quiet, lights glowing in windows, smoke rising from chimneys. This was home. This was what I had worked for and paid for and deserved to enjoy without harassment or threats, or someone abusing their tiny amount of power to make my life difficult. I stood in my driveway, looking down the street toward where Karen's house sat empty and dark. A year ago, that house had been the source of so much stress and anxiety. Now it was just another building waiting for a new chapter. Bob's porch light flicked on, and he came out to add more salt to his walkway. He saw me and waved. I waved back. Simple, neighborly, the way things should be. Inside, I made dinner and settled in for the evening. The ice storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline world that would melt away in a day or two. Life would continue its normal rhythm. Work, errands, home maintenance, occasional neighborhood drama that did not involve embezzlement or arrests. Before bed, I went out to the garage one more time. The remaining bags of Sandbox sand sat in the corner, exactly where they had been for over a year. I picked up one of the bags, feeling its weight, remembering the moment I loaded 10 of these into my truck bed and drove them to Karen's house. It had been petty. It had been vindictive. It had been absolutely the right thing to do. I set the bag back down and turned off the garage light. Tomorrow, I would probably donate the sand to a local park or school. It had served its purpose, and I did not need physical reminders of the whole situation. The real reminder would be the improved neighborhood, the better HOA board, and the knowledge that standing up to bullies, even in small ways, can make a real difference. Karen had demanded my rock salt supply, expecting me to comply because that was what everyone always did. They gave her what she wanted to avoid her wrath. They painted their mailboxes and hid their trash cans and paid their arbitrary fines because fighting back seemed too difficult. So I gave her Sandbox sand instead and watched her driveway stay icy and refused to back down when she threatened me. And somehow, that one act of petty defiance unraveled years of corruption and abuse. As I lay in bed that night, listening to wind rattle my windows and ice crack on tree branches outside, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because Karen was in prison or because she had lost everything, though I would be lying if I said there was not some justice in that. No, the satisfaction came from knowing I had stood my ground. I had refused to be bullied. I had documented everything and fought back through proper channels and ultimately helped create positive change in my community. The Sandbox sand was just sand. The ice storm was just weather. But the choice to say no to someone abusing their power, that mattered. That changed everything. I fell asleep thinking about spring when the ice would be long gone and the neighborhood would be green and warm again. Maybe I would finally use some of that Sandbox sand to build something positive, a garden border or a base for a small patio project. Turn the symbol of my petty revenge into something constructive. Or maybe I would just donate it all and be done with the whole thing. Either way, I had won. Not because Karen lost, but because I stood up for myself and helped create a better community in the process. That was worth more than any amount of rock salt or Sandbox sand or perfectly painted mailboxes. The ice storm ended. Karen went to prison. Life went on. And somewhere in my garage, 10 fewer bags of playground sand sat as a reminder that sometimes the pettiest acts lead to the most profound consequences. When spring finally arrived in April, I did donate the remaining Sandbox sand to a local elementary school that was renovating its playground. The teacher who accepted the donation was incredibly grateful, saying they had been trying to find affordable sand for weeks. "Where did you get all this?" she asked as I helped unload the bags. "Long story," I said. "Let us just say it served a different purpose first, and now it gets to help kids have fun." She looked confused but did not press for details. As I drove away from the school, my truck finally empty of the sand that had caused so much chaos, I felt the last piece of the Karen saga finally close. The sand would be used for its intended purpose. Children would play on it, and the whole ridiculous situation would fade into neighborhood legend. Bob still brought it up sometimes when we had cookouts or neighborhood gatherings. "Tell the new neighbors about the Sandbox sand incident," he would say with a grin. And I would tell the story, usually to shocked laughter and disbelief. The new family who eventually moved into Karen's old house in May were lovely people named the Williams family. They had 2 young kids and a friendly golden retriever. I helped them move some furniture on their first day, and Mrs. Williams asked me about the neighborhood. "It is pretty great," I told her honestly. "Very friendly, good HOA board. We had some issues a while back, but they have been resolved." "What kind of issues?" she asked. "The previous president was stealing from the HOA funds. She is in prison now, but the new president is excellent, very fair and reasonable." Her eyes went wide. "That is terrible, but at least it got caught." "Yeah," I agreed. "Sometimes it just takes one person willing to stand up and call out bad behavior. Then everything else follows." I never told the Williams family that I was that person, or that their house used to belong to the corrupt HOA president, or that it all started with rock salt and Sandbox sand during an ice storm. They would probably hear the story eventually through neighborhood gossip, but I was content to let it come from someone else. Harold continued as HOA president for 2 more years before stepping down due to health issues. The board that replaced him continued his policies of fairness and transparency. Property values in Willow Creek Estates actually increased after Karen's removal, probably because potential buyers did research and liked what they saw about community governance. As for me, I kept my mailbox bronze, my trash cans hidden, and my garden hose neatly coiled in the garage. Not because I was afraid of violations, but because they were reasonable standards that I did not mind following when they were enforced fairly and applied to everyone equally. The ice storm that changed everything became just another winter memory, the kind of thing you mention when someone complains about current weather. "Remember that ice storm in February 2 years ago? That was brutal. But for me, it would always be more than just weather. It was the day I decided to stop being afraid of someone who had no real power, except what people gave her through their fear. It was the day I chose petty revenge over compliance and accidentally triggered a chain of events that brought justice and positive change. It was the day Karen demanded my rock salt supply, and I gave her Sandbox sand instead and watched her driveway stay icy. And honestly, I would do it again in a heartbeat. The end came quietly, not with drama or fanfare. Just a peaceful neighborhood, a fair HOA board, and the knowledge that sometimes standing up to bullies is worth whatever consequences might follow. Because the alternative, living in fear and compliance and constant anxiety about arbitrary rules, was not really living at all. So I kept my rock salt properly stocked, never hoarded but always prepared. I helped neighbors when they needed it, asked nicely rather than demanding. I attended HOA meetings and voiced opinions and worked to keep the community standards high without becoming tyrannical. And every winter, when the first ice storm threatened, I thought about Karen and her downfall and smiled. Not because I had destroyed her. She had destroyed herself through years of theft and abuse, but because I had played a small part in removing a bully from power and making my neighborhood a better place. That was enough. That was everything. And as I salted my driveway each winter, watching the ice melt away under the chemical reaction, I remembered that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance create the biggest waves of change. Karen demanded my rock salt supply. I gave her Sandbox sand. Her driveway stayed icy, her rain ended, and justice was served. And I lived happily ever after in a neighborhood that finally felt like home.